What do you rely on when you improvise on a jazz tune? I'm Ron Drotos from KeyboardImprov.com, and welcome to my journey through the real book, number 113. This is Wayne Shorter's great tune, Fall, which is not a widely played tune. I'm glad it's in the real book because it gives us a chance to play these things that you're not going to really get called at a jam session, for instance, unless it's like the Wayne Shorter, society or something like that, and we should form one. However, the last tune that we looked at in the book, ESP, was also coincidentally by Wayne Shorter. That was from 1965, and in that one, Wayne and the Miles Davis Quintet were pushing the envelope of jazz by playing non-traditional chord progressions, and maybe even loosening sort of the role of the soloist, like playing what scales you're going to play over the melody or the chords, or the bass line, and sort of loosening that up a little bit, being able to play motivically that doesn't always follow the chords exactly, things like that. And in Fall, it's 3 years later, and they take it a step or two further. They really developed, the 60s must have been an incredible time for creativity. I mean, look at, in pop music, the Beatles, right? So the Miles Davis Quintet did something similar, because in Fall, it's still got the non-traditional chord progression, musical form that's not AABA, but at the same time, they're loosening the roles of, or blurring the lines between soloist and background, even solo and melody, because they're using this tune as the basis of really the improvisation. It goes back to the very early days of jazz in a sense. If you read Gunther Schuler's book, Early Jazz, there's an interview with an early jazz violinist, and this is around 1900, 1905, before jazz was recorded by about 10, 15 years. And that person who was there said that the earliest jazz musicians would, one of them would play the melody, like the violin, and the clarinet would improvise around that melody at the same time. To my ears, that was never really recorded like that. By the time recordings were, jazz recordings were begun around, I think it was 1918, the original Dixieland Jazz Band, they had already developed this three-part structure where the clarinet would play this high obligato, bouncing around, the trumpet would play the melody, and the trombone would play a lower counter melody. But according to this interview, in the early days, they would both play the melody, but one would improvise a little bit with the rhythms or a few notes here and there at the same time that someone else is playing the melody exactly. So in 1968, that's, to my ears, what the Miles Davis Quintet was doing in a very thoroughly modern way, but one of them would play the melody, Miles or Wayne Shorter, and the other one would start snaking around it, sort of blurring it, playing a little lower, a little higher, a little behind the rhythm. They did it on a few tunes. And it became this, it's almost like this hypnotic thing where they're playing. And then it goes up, and then here's the hook. And that's why I think it's called Fall, because it falls down, and then it starts again. And each time they kind of get a little farther away from it, and Miles will go off here, or they'll do a little solo for the first couple measures. And then it'll come back in as a refrain, and then someone else will take a solo. Come back in. And it's like this in and out of the melody. And it brings me to my question. When you're playing a tune like this, that you don't know where it's going, it's sort of following it, what do you trust? Well, you trust your ears, your instinct, and getting into the sound of everything. That's what this is for me, this tune. It really challenges us to play in a little different way, because you could just improvise for 5 choruses on this, but I don't think that's really what the tune was devised for. So it's just actually a big question. Maybe you could, and it would sound great, but I'm going to sort of follow in the Miles Davis Quintet's footsteps by letting it take me out of my usual way of approaching a tune and just seeing what happens when I come back to the melody, use these motifs freely, use them with these chords. Maybe I'll just start out of tempo and just sort of see where it takes me here. So come along for the ride, and then, yes, try this at home. such an interesting tune, right? Because it's what I was saying before. Like, what do you trust? You know, these chords aren't going where we think they're going to go. You know, I have this motif, you know, okay, maybe I'll harmonize it in fourths, but then do I play that fourth or do I go to a fifth there because that clashes? You know, it's just it's sort of going moment by moment, just like we're having a conversation, you know, and seeing where it goes and not having to know what's going to happen in a minute from now. Because, you know, let's face it, most of the time when we play jazz, we count off the tune and we know it's going to be a trumpet solo and then a guitar solo and then a piano solo and then a bass solo and maybe we'll trade four with the drums. And that's great, but at the same time, we can start and just totally trust our instincts. You know, I know these chords, I know the tune, I can listen and just see what happens. And we partially thank Miles Davis Quintet for that. So good luck with this tune. Thanks for being here. I'll see you, if you're following this, in number 114, Falling Grace, which same kind of tune by Steve Swallow. In that the chords lead us on a journey that we've never been on before. I'll see you then.